He was a husband, father, church volunteer, and businessman, but behind that polite smile was a man hiding barrels of bodies and a trail of missing women that stretched across 2 states. For over 15 years, he preyed on vulnerable women who trusted him. He promised them jobs, love, and security, but what they got instead was a death sentence. Each disappearance was carefully covered up by elaborate lies, and when investigators finally raided his properties, they were horrified at what they discovered. This is the story of how John Edward Robinson, the American serial killer, used charm, the internet, and manipulation to hunt in plain sight. Welcome to True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell before you go. We're going to be talking about multiple victims throughout today's story, so be sure to stay to the end and get ready because today's story is very dark. Also, I am sick, so please excuse my voice today. All right, my friends, let's get into it. John Edward Robinson was born on December 27th, 1943, and he was raised in Cicero, Illinois. He described his family as very dysfunctional growing up, and he said that because he described his dad as an alcoholic father, and he said he also had a very strict mother. Despite his home life, though, Robinson seemed to have a lot of charm and ambition. He became an Eagle Scout and even traveled to London in 1957 to perform for the Queen. Beneath the surface of this all-American boy image, though, was someone who loved deceit and breaking the rules. He was in trouble all the time at school and ended up dropping out of college later on in life. By the mid-1960s, John actually moved to Kansas City, and he married a woman there named Nancy Jo Lynch, and then they had 4 children together. In the 1970s, Robinson seemed to be the perfect family man and a community volunteer. He was a scoutmaster, a little league coach, a Sunday school teacher, and he even talked his way onto the board for a charity organization by forging letters to name himself the Man of the Year. I'm sure you're starting to tally up some of these red flags at this point, and we're just getting started. But to the neighbors in the Kansas suburbs, John J.R. Robinson appeared to be this warm, church-going entrepreneur with a loving wife and kids. What people didn't see from the outside, though, was that Robinson was living a double life. He was a total con man. John was embezzling money, forging checks, and committed financial fraud all through the 60s and 70s. He repeatedly got into legal trouble for these schemes. He was arrested for embezzling from the employers, a fake medical consulting company scam, and other cons that he was running. By 1979, after multiple probation violations and new fraud charges, Robinson actually served some time in jail. Despite all the red flags, though, he continued to charm the people that were around him and always seemed to land on his feet each time with a new scheme. Around 1984, Robinson started a management consulting company, and this was essentially a shell or fake business to continue the crimes that he'd already been committing. This is when his pattern escalated from white-collar crime to violent crime. Behind closed doors, Robinson had developed aggressive and deviant tastes. He was a part of an underground community, at least at that time, with similar interests, and he intentionally sought out vulnerable women to conduct these behaviors. In May of 1985, a young woman named Teresa Williams learned just how violent he could be. Teresa lived nearby and caught his attention, and he made a mental note of where she lived. John barged into her Kansas City apartment early one morning, furious, and claimed that she had slighted him. She had never met him before. He then dragged the 21-year-old woman out of bed by her hair, attacked and hit her, and then held her at gunpoint. When she screamed, he pulled the trigger and it clicked because there were no bullets in the chamber. He was taunting her in this moment, which is just sickening. Robinson then violated her with the barrel of the gun and terrorized her with horrifying threats. Then he left and warned her to not ever cross him again. This horrifying event really shows us the monster that was emerging behind Robinson's mask. The first known murder victim, though, in today's video was Paula Godfrey, and she was a 19-year-old from the Kansas City area. Paula was bright, friendly, and excited to be starting her career. In 1984, she crossed paths with John, who presented himself as this successful businessman. Robinson had established 2 fake companies at this point, and he said he was launching a management training program now too. He offered Paula a job as a sales representative and said that he would send her and other young women to Texas for some specialized training. For Paula, this sounded like an incredible opportunity. She told her family that Robinson arranged for her and some other people to fly to San Antonio and that this would be an amazing career opportunity for her. If only that were true. On September 1st, 1984, Robinson picked Paula up from her home in Overland Park, Kansas to take her to the airport. That was the last time Paula's family would ever see her alive. When days passed without any word from Paula, her parents were beginning to worry, so they filed a missing persons report with the local police. Investigators questioned Robinson, who admitted that he did pick her up, but claimed that he had no knowledge of where she was at that time. It seemed as if Paula had almost completely vanished into thin air. Then, something even more unusual happened. A few days after Paula was reported missing, her parents received a typed letter from Paula. In this letter, Paula thanked John Robinson for his help and said that she was okay, but added that she didn't ever want to see her family again. It was signed with her name, but this was so strange. The letter raised serious concerns because it wasn't like Paula at all to cut contact off with her family, and the wording felt off. But because she was an adult and the letter suggested she did leave on her own, the police basically signed off of this because without any evidence of a crime, the investigation just stopped. Law enforcement saw that letter as proof that Paula was alive and had voluntarily left, so they closed the missing persons case. No physical trace of Paula Godfrey has ever been found. In 1985, John ran into a woman named Lisa Stacy, who was also just 19 years old, and she had her infant daughter with her, Tiffany Lynn. Lisa had married a man named Carl Stacy in 1984 when she got pregnant, but their marriage was very rocky. By January of 1985, Lisa's husband had left her and he actually re-enlisted into the Navy. He was stationed out of state, leaving Lisa and the baby to fend for themselves. So, with a 4-month-old infant and no support, Lisa was struggling. She needed help, so she went to the Kansas City Women's Refuge Center called Hope House. John Robinson saw an opportunity here because not only did he prey on vulnerable young women, but at that time he also had a specific request from his younger brother. Donald Robinson and Donald's wife Helen desperately wanted a child and had mentioned to John that they were trying to adopt. Robinson told his brother at a family gathering in 1983 that he had connections in the adoption world and that he could help them find a baby. Robinson had created an entire scheme to pull this off. He claimed to know an attorney and ran a program for unwed mothers with babies, and he even approached a social worker with this story. Then he took $2,500 from his brother for the adoption expenses and later an additional $3,000 for legal fees, all to put this sinister plan together. Lisa Stacy was exactly the kind of person Robinson wanted to target. She was a young mother, down on her luck and with a newborn. Through contacts at the Hope House, the refugee center, Robinson met Lisa under an alias in January of 1985. He presented himself as this philanthropist and businessman who ran a special program to help out single moms. He offered Lisa a free place to stay, job training, and even daycare for Tiffany. All she had to do was sign up for his services and work towards getting her GED. It sounded like a godsend to Lisa. Lisa's family, however, was very cautious about all of this because it seemed too good to be true. Despite her family's concerns, on January 8, 1985, Lisa accepted John's help. They were placed in a room at the Roadway Inn in Overland Park, Kansas, which was paid for by John Robinson. Over the next day, John had Lisa fill out some paperwork, including signing blank sheets of paper. Does this sound familiar to you? Remember, Paula's family received letters signed by her, so now we're starting to see a pattern form here. On January 9th, 1985, a massive snowstorm hit the area, and that afternoon, John insisted on picking up Lisa and Tiffany for some errands. She left her baby Tiffany with her sister-in-law that morning and mentioned that this kind John Osborne man was helping her get back on her feet. She seemed hopeful about the future and excited, even saying that she might get to travel as part of this job training. When Lisa returned to pick up Tiffany that afternoon, she told her sister-in-law, Kathy, that John Osborne had paid for their motel and was taking very good care of them. Robinson ended up calling Kathy's house to get directions during this blizzard, and he arrived there at about 3 p.m. Because of the snow, though, Lisa left her car at Kathy's house expecting to return, but she never did. Around 4:30 p.m. that same day, Lisa made a panicked phone call to her mother-in-law, Betty Stacy. Lisa was crying and hysterical and said, "They're saying I'm an unfit mother and that you want to take Tiffany away from me." She also said that they were pressuring her to sign 4 blank sheets of paper, and Betty Stacy was worried and told Lisa not to sign anything and that none of that was true. In the middle of that call, Lisa said, "Here they come," and suddenly hung up. That concerning call was the last time anyone in Lisa's family would hear her voice. Lisa didn't come back for her car or her belongings, and they vanished from the motel. A few days later, Betty Stacy received a typewritten letter signed by Lisa saying that she was leaving to start a new life and wanted no further contact from anyone. Meanwhile, Robinson was executing the rest of his plan. On January 10th, 1985, so the day after Lisa went missing, John Robinson showed up at his own home in Stanley, Kansas, carrying an infant. He introduced this baby to his wife Nancy as Tiffany, saying that the infant's mother had tragically died and that he facilitated a private adoption. Nancy said that nothing seemed off, and she later testified that she felt her husband was doing the right thing by rescuing this baby from a terrible situation. That same day, Donald and Helen, so Robinson's brother and sister-in-law, flew into Kansas City. John brought them a healthy, beautiful baby girl just weeks after telling them that he'd found a baby for them for adoption. Think about this. He said this to them while Lisa was still alive. At his office, John had paperwork that had forged signatures of 2 lawyers and a judge. Donald and Helen Robinson adopted the baby, and they renamed her Heather Tiffany Robinson. Then they paid John $5,500 in fees for this adoption. They were told the same story that he told his wife, which is why the baby was available so quickly. Of course, we here know that those were all lies because Tiffany was not an orphan at all. She was the kidnapped child of a murder victim. When Kathy realized that Lisa never came back for her car, she immediately filed a missing persons report on January 11th. Overland Park police began investigating, and Robinson's name very quickly came to the surface because it came out that he placed Lisa and Tiffany at that motel. On February 1st, 1985, detectives interviewed him about Lisa's disappearance. Robinson said that he was just helping this young mother through a charity program and that he placed Lisa in the motel just to help her out. He claimed that Lisa thanked him and left with her baby and a new man, described as a young white male in an older model green car, supposedly to start a better life somewhere else. We obviously know that this is a lie, but with no body, no witnesses, and only circumstantial evidence, the case went cold. For 15 years, Lisa Stacy's fate remained a mystery. Tiffany grew up in the Robinson family, and it wasn't until his arrest in 2000 that her DNA confirmed her true identity and she was reunited with Lisa's side of the family. By then, Heather was already a teenager, learning that her biological mother had not abandoned her at all, but that she had been murdered by Robinson in January of 1985. Sadly, Lisa's body was also never found. Between 1985 and 1987, Robinson continued his shady business deals. Now, while we don't have all the records of all the known victims from 86 and 87, he was still on the hunt. That year, he met a woman named Katherine Clampet, and she was a 27-year-old from Wichita Falls, Texas. Katherine had a young son, and she left him in her parents' care so that she could move to Kansas City to try to find a good job and help provide for him. She was described as adventurous and motivated, and she really wanted to build a stable life for herself and for her son. So, when a promising job caught her attention, she pursued it, and that decision would have fatal consequences. Robinson placed ads for his company called Equi2 in the newspapers, and this job promised travel and new clothes as a part of the job package. It sounded like an exciting executive assistant type role, so of course Katherine was interested. Shortly after arriving in Kansas City, she responded to that ad and met Robinson. Just like he had with Paula and with Lisa, Robinson turned on the charm and hired Katherine Clampet right there on the spot. For a few months, Katherine stayed in the Kansas City area, living in the local hotels in the area near her office. She wrote letters to her family, and she seemed so grateful and happy about this job. However, by the summer of 1987, Katherine also disappeared. Specifically on June 15th, 1987, she told her brother that she was going to go meet with Robinson about some paperwork or some project, and she never came back from that meeting. Katherine's family was nervous when they couldn't reach her, so they eventually learned that Equi2 was not a legitimate, thriving business like Katherine thought it was, and that Robinson's stories were not adding up. Like Paula's case, Katherine's disappearance was also reported to the police. But again, John Robinson denied any knowledge of what happened to her, and there was no physical evidence or witness to a crime here either. With Katherine being an adult who moved states by choice, the case didn't get the urgency that it needed, and it remained an open missing persons case for many years. No letters came this time. Katherine's poor parents and her child were left in limbo, not knowing if she had just run off or if something bad happened to her. Katherine Clampet's disappearance in 1987 marked the end of Robinson's first wave of crimes. By this time, 3 young women, so Paula, Lisa, and Katherine, had all vanished in the Kansas City area with one common denominator, John Robinson. It's scary to know that he got away with killing 3 young women without any real attention from the cops. However, A twist of fate paused Robinson's killing spree after Katherine because he was arrested and sent to prison on fraud charges in 1987. The authorities had finally caught up to him for one of his financial schemes. Robinson spent the next several years, so from 87 to 93 in prison, first in Kansas, and then he was transferred to Missouri for another fraud conviction and additional parole violations. This incarceration saved lives because he couldn't prey on women on the outside during those years. Little did anyone know, though, Robinson's time in prison would also provide him with his next victim and an even wider web of deceit once he was free again. In prison, John Robinson was a model inmate. He was polite, helpful, and always listened to staff. And it was there that he met Beverly Bonner, a 49-year-old prison librarian. Bonner was the wife of a doctor at Western Missouri Prison. She was educated, kind, and also somewhat unfulfilled in her marriage. When Robinson crossed her path in the late 1980s inside that prison, he saw her as another vulnerable person that he could just try to charm and manipulate. To Beverly, Robinson seemed like a reformed, intelligent man who was possibly wrongfully convicted and just trying to start over. He flattered her and he made her feel special, and Beverly completely fell under his spell. By the time John was released on parole in January of 1994, Beverly had decided to leave her husband and join John Robinson in a business venture outside of prison. This decision was a huge leap for Beverly. She divorced her husband, and this meant that she would have a substantial monthly alimony check coming from him. When Beverly told her family that she was going to be moving to Kansas to work with Robinson, they found it very strange, but she insisted that this was a legitimate opportunity. We know that Robinson's business was just a front, and he had no intention of actually working with Beverly. He just wanted her money. John wasted no time capitalizing on her resources, and he had Beverly's alimony checks forwarded to a post office box in Kansas that was in his name. After Robinson's release in 1994, Beverly Bonner vanished. To her mother and extended family back in Ohio, Robinson had all these stories lined up. He told Beverly's mother that Beverly had moved away for work and said that she took a job out in Australia. To make this believable, Robinson continued having Beverly's alimony checks sent to the Kansas P.O. box, and he personally mailed Beverly's mother the portions that she was owed of it. For several years, Beverly's mother forwarded the rest of the check to Robinson, thinking that Beverly was overseas and he was handling her finances for her. All the while, Robinson forged Beverly's signature to go cash these checks, pocketing all the money. Beverly Bonner's disappearance was hidden by Robinson's manipulations, though. Her family didn't even report her missing because they believed that she was working out of the country. And all that time, Robinson was cashing Beverly's alimony checks, literally profiting off of murdering the librarian that's shown him kindness. He had found a way to make money from killing his victims. Robinson wasn't done with his killing spree, though. Now free in 94, he looked for even more victims, and this time he used the internet. Sheila Faith was a 45-year-old mother in 1994 living in Fullerton, California with her 15-year-old daughter, Debbie Faith. Debbie had spina bifida, which is a birth defect that confined her to a wheelchair and required lifelong medical care for it. Sheila and Debbie were extremely close. Debbie depended on her mother for literally everything, and Sheila's life revolved around taking care of her disabled daughter. They were also somewhat isolated and struggling financially because Debbie's condition meant high medical expenses, and the family received disability and pension checks to try to help make ends meet for her. John Robinson stepped in and presented himself as this wealthy businessman and philanthropist who had taken an interest in them. He first contacted Sheila through a pen pal website. Now remember, this was the start of the internet chat rooms at this time, so Robinson was quick to use this technology for his advantage. Using one of his fake identities, he befriended Sheila and showered her with empathy and promises. He offered to pay for Debbie's medical treatments and even provide Sheila with a job so that she could comfortably support her daughter. For a single mother of a child with special needs, this offer must have seemed heaven sent for her. Sheila was described as kind but perhaps a bit naive to the dangers of trusting someone like him, and this is exactly why John targeted her. In late 1994, Robinson convinced Sheila to uproot her whole life and move to Kansas City with Debbie. He painted a picture of a new beginning, including top-notch care for Debbie, a good job for Sheila, and a supportive community there. Unfortunately, Sheila relocated from California to Kansas City with her wheelchair-bound daughter. As soon as they arrived, once again, Sheila and Debbie disappeared. We'll get into the horrific and tragic specifics later on in the video, but both of their bodies were later found. Be prepared because it is devastating. Robinson then took control over Sheila's income. Remember, Sheila had been receiving those checks for the disability and pension, so for 7 years after their murders, Robinson continued to cash those checks as if Sheila were still alive. Friends and family of the face didn't really reach out very much, but when someone did ask about them, he told them that Sheila and Debbie had moved away. What happened to Sheila and Debbie, plus what he had done to everyone else, just emphasizes how truly heartless Robinson was. He preyed on a mother's devotion to her disabled child, and they aren't even the last of his victims. As the internet became more accessible in the late 1990s, John Robinson embraced it as a tool to find his victims. He was the first serial killer to ever do this. Robinson created an online alias that he used in these chat rooms and on websites where people explored their intimate fantasies, if you know what I mean. He portrayed himself as an experienced, wealthy, dominant male seeking submissive women for that type of relationship. This wasn't entirely a lie because he did have a history of enjoying things like this, but now he had access to a huge pool of victims all over the country, and that is terrifying. John managed to compartmentalize his life during this time, and shockingly, he was still married to Nancy. Has anyone else noticed this pattern in serial killer cases? Let me know in the comments down below. But they lived in a mobile home in Olathe, Kansas. Forgive me if I'm saying that wrong. And they also had a farm in Lynn County, Kansas. John moved a trailer onto that land in 1998, and he had had a phone line installed, including one for his computer so that he could continue his online chatting. Another woman that John met online was Isabella. Isabella Luica was born in Poland in 1978. She moved to the United States as a child and grew up in Indiana, and by the late 90s, Isabella was a young college student at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. She was creative and free-spirited, and she was also interested in alternative lifestyles. She dabbled in paganism, goth culture, and intimate fantasy just like Robinson. Isabella was also an artist, and her friends said that she was talented at drawing and painting. In 1997, at age 19, Isabella felt this urge to explore life outside of her strict family environment, and the internet allowed her that opportunity to connect with like-minded people. Isabella then met John. He presented himself as this international businessman in Kansas City who was really impressed by her interests in art. He told Isabella that he ran a publishing or graphics business and said that he could offer her a job and help her illustrate and edit her work. Robinson also enticed Isabella with the idea of a relationship. He was an older, experienced, dominant man and said that he would train her in this lifestyle that she was super curious about. According to friends, Isabella was intrigued by living submissively under a consensual contract. In this contract, he would be seen as her master. In the summer of 97, 19-year-old Isabella Luica took a leap of faith. She told her parents that she had a summer internship in Kansas City, packed up her car, and drove to Kansas. She mentioned that if the job went well, she might stay longer, and also hinted at the possibility of getting married, which was very random to her family. It came out later that Robinson actually gave Isabella a ring and even took her to the courthouse in Kansas City where they got a marriage license, but obviously they never filed it or picked it up. John set Isabella up as soon as she got there, and it seemed to her like he was very chivalrous. But you tell me if this sounds like a knight in shining armor. He helped her lease a private mailbox at Mailboxes ETC in Overland Park, and he listed both of their names so that he could also access her mail. He set up her car insurance through his agent, calling her an employee, and he also helped Isabella open up a bank account at the same bank that he used for his businesses. This gave him easy access to monitor her spending, and he could also use her money. She lived in the Edgebrook Apartments in Lenexa, Kansas, and he paid the rent and was listed as a co-occupant. John made it seem like he was just sponsoring Isabella. For example, to the apartment manager, Robinson described meeting Isabella at a graphics trade show and said that he recruited her to work with him and be his roommate. He also told business contacts that Isabella was his adopted daughter working for him, which was such a bizarre cover story given the real nature of their relationship. During this time, Isabella supposedly worked for Robinson's publication company doing graphic design and some editing tasks, but she was telling people that she was his wife, and she was wearing a ring. Keep in mind, all this is happening while Nancy is married to him. Their relationship centered around their fantasies, and they signed a 115-item contract outlining Isabella's obedience and John's control over all the aspects of her life. Photos were later found showing Isabella in suggestive poses and clothing, and this was all evidence of the lifestyle that they were living to the investigators. Nancy discovered her husband's involvement with Isabella at some point, apparently, but unlike prior affairs where John would quickly cut them off, he continued to be with Isabella, which even made Nancy suspect that there was something strange about this. Nancy probably wasn't thinking anything along the lines of murder, but she may have thought that he was either obsessed with her or that this was a serious affair. For about 2 years, Isabella lived under Robinson's control, willingly at first. She had some contact with her old friends, but that communication slowed down. She also told a couple of her friends about this older married man and her secret life as a submissive with him in Kansas, and they were concerned, but she seemed to be certain that this is what she wanted. However, by 1999, something shifted. Isabella was in her early 20s and started to become more independent or maybe even unhappy with this secret life that she was living with Robinson. As soon as she said that she didn't want this anymore, she disappeared. The trial record suggests that Isabella vanished in the late summer or early fall of 1999. And by mid-1999, Robinson hired a moving company to clear out Isabella's Edgebrook apartment. Then he moved her furniture and belongings into a storage unit in Kansas. Over a couple of weeks, all of Isabella's things, like her books, clothing, and personal items, were moved out by him. He invited another woman named Alicia Cox to come stay at the apartment, even though some of Isabella's belongings were still in there, and he said that the prior tenant had vacated the property. Cox found it really odd that there were women's belongings around, and she said that she didn't want to move in, but this just shows us that Robinson knew Isabella was gone and she wasn't coming back. In September of 1999, with months still left on Isabella's lease, John paid the last month's rent and told the property manager that they had vacated early. The manager inspected the unit, and it was mostly empty except for some items. When police later searched that apartment, they found hundreds of small reddish-brown bloodstains in the bedroom, in the closet specifically, and forensic testing confirmed that it was Isabella's blood in there. The amount and pattern of the blood hinted at repeated blows with a high-velocity cast-off. This is consistent with a beating or stabbing, but we'll get into this more later. From what we know, we can put together that John Robinson likely murdered Isabella Lewica in that apartment, and then he meticulously cleaned up and removed her body. But why did Robinson kill Isabella after being with her for 2 years? There's a possibility that she was becoming defiant in his eyes, but he was also courting a new victim by 1999 to take her place. Suzette Marie Troughton was 27 years old when she crossed paths with John. She lived near Monroe, Michigan, close to her mother, and she was actually a licensed practical nurse or LPN by training. Suzette was the youngest of 5 siblings, and she had a vivacious, caring personality. She adored animals, especially her 2 little dogs, Pika and Harry, and she was extremely close with her mother, Carolyn. They spoke on the phone or saw each other almost every day. What even her family didn't fully know, though, was that Suzette had an adventurous private life, and she was also involved in those same online communities as a submissive. In the mid-1990s, Suzette's interests actually led her to meeting a Canadian woman named Laura Remington online, and she trained Suzette in all these submissive practices and lifestyle. Suzette even had her own personal ad presenting herself as a willing submissive looking for someone dominant. Through these channels, John Robinson found Suzette and used his typical approach of presenting a high-paying job and this unique relationship. Robinson told Suzette that he had an elderly father named Papa John who needed a caregiver for an overseas trip. He painted this glamorous picture of what his life looked like, and John said that he and his father were wealthy, selling off international businesses, and they needed a nurse or travel companion to accompany them. He offered $60,000 a year plus expenses, and for a small-town nurse, this sounded like a once-in-a-lifetime job. Suzette was told that she would see the world, from Switzerland to Australia, Hawaii, all first class, while working as a nurse and enjoying the role of a submissive partner to Robinson. This sounded like a dream to her. Robinson and Suzette grew close online. By late 1999, Suzette considered herself to be in a relationship with him, despite having only met him in person a couple of times. She told her friend Lore that John had become her owner and said that they exchanged a formal contract that Suzette chose to sign. They even recorded some of their encounters where she engaged with him in these fantasies. The investigators also later found these videos, and that all corroborated everything that we're talking about right now. Suzette took 2 brief trips to Kansas City in October and November, and one of them was an interview, and the second one was to sign the contract. When she got back home after these trips, Suzette was so excited to tell her mom and her friends that she had landed a once-in-a-lifetime job. She told them that she'd be a traveling caregiver to a wealthy man, making $65,000 a year, and all the travel would be paid. She told her mom that it was a chance to save money for nursing school and that she'd only be gone for a year. Now, to clarify for anyone that doesn't know, she was an LPN by training, so she wanted to go to a formal nursing school to become a registered nurse. School's expensive, so she saw this as a way to potentially better her future. Suzette reassured her somewhat skeptical mom that this man, John, was legitimate and kind. By February of 2000, Robinson helped Suzette rent a U-Haul truck, and on February 12th, Suzette left Michigan. She brought her two dogs with her in the truck's cab, and John told her that it was fine to bring them and said that they'd all travel together. They arrived in the Kansas City area on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2000, and checked into the Guest House Suites hotel. Robinson had paid for her room 216, and initially she had her dogs there with her. They found out, though, that the hotel actually had a no pets policy, so 2 days later on the 16th, Robinson helped by boarding Suzette's dogs at a nearby animal clinic. This was significant because it shows that even at that early stage, he had already been planning to remove the obstacles in the way, like the dogs, when the time came. He told Suzette that it was only temporary until they left on their trip and that they would be bringing the dogs with them. Over the next 2 weeks, Suzette stayed in Kansas, waiting to leave for their adventure. She remained in close contact with her mom almost daily, and Suzette repeatedly said that their travel itinerary kept changing. First, it was supposed to be Europe, and then maybe a trip in the States to go on a yacht in California, and so on. Robinson was just stringing her along the whole time, though. Suzette also put her belongings into a storage unit since she hadn't found an apartment, and she told her mom that she didn't need one because they'd be leaving for that long trip very soon. During this time, Suzette and Robinson wrote emails back and forth discussing their roles. Everything seemed on track for Suzette, and she was so excited that she couldn't even see the danger right in front of her. March 1st, 2000 would be the turning point, though. According to the timeline that the investigators pieced together, this is how the events unfolded. At 12:51 a.m., Suzette was on her laptop chatting with her friend Laura Remington. They said their goodbyes because Suzette said that she'd be leaving later that morning to go on this huge international trip. This is the last known communication where Suzette herself was for certain the one typing. Suzette called her mom Carolyn at work at 1 in the morning because her mom actually worked the night shift. She enthusiastically said that she and Robinson would be leaving that morning, and it was a brief call but an important one because this is the last time she would ever hear from her daughter. After that, there's a gap until late morning. We don't know what happened during those hours, but evidence suggests that her life came to an end sometime before noon on March 1st. By 11:43 a.m., a phone call was placed from Robinson's trailer to his wife Nancy at work. Nancy later said that John called her to say that he'd be out of reach for a while and said that he and one of his employees were leaving town. If Suzette was with him at that point, she never spoke during the call. John then drove to the vet clinic at 2:13 p.m. where Suzette's dogs were boarded, and staff said that Robinson seemed very agitated and in a hurry. He picked up the two dogs and said that he was rushing to get to the airport for a flight. Suzette wasn't with him, and no one saw her waiting in the truck either. This was very odd. At 2:24, Robinson's access code was used to enter his private storage unit there in town, and he left 6 minutes later. Investigators believe that this might have been when he maybe stashed something incriminating away in the storage unit. By 2:35, John was back in his neighborhood at the front office. He asked the office assistant to call animal control to report two loose dogs at the park. He abandoned Suzette's dogs by kicking them out of the car in their kennels, and these dogs meant everything to her. Animal control officer Rodney McLean responded in 10 minutes and found Pika and Harry shivering inside of a small kennel near the park's office. The dogs were unharmed, and they were then taken to a shelter. It's crazy to think that Robinson could murder women without any thought, but he never harmed animals. That's abnormal for these types of criminals. By 3 p.m. at the Guest House Suites Hotel, a housekeeper named Isabella Clark saw a man matching Robinson's description loading a bunch of belongings out of 216 into the back of a pickup truck. He was alone. When Miss Clark later cleaned that room, she found blood on the bed linens and towels, and at first she was really worried, but then she remembered that over that past week, Suzette's room had had some bloody towels because Suzette was having a very heavy and long menstrual cycle. In case you question this like I initially did, Suzette actually mentioned this to her friend Laura online. Her cycle was irregular and she was bleeding a lot in late February, so the housekeeper assumed that the blood was from that and not the crime scene. The trial evidence later showed that the actual murder had likely occurred at Robinson's farm, so the blood in the hotel was likely from her cycle and not from any type of violence. By 3:30, a security camera caught Robinson at the hotel's front desk, checking out of room 216. Then he paid the bill, and he seemed very calm. Hotel staff later confirmed that Suzette wasn't with him and that they hadn't seen her at all on March 1st. In the blink of an eye, Suzette Troughton had vanished, and just like he had for the other victims, Robinson tried to make it seem like Suzette was still alive. On March 6th, letters supposedly from Suzette arrived to her parents' home from Kansas City, even though the letter made it seem like she was in California. They were actually in Suzette's handwriting, which was strange. John had forced Suzette to sign several blank stationery pages as well. This explains why some letters looked genuinely like Suzette's writing because he was forging it. Carolyn was immediately uneasy because Suzette always misspoke and misspelled words, and these letters were perfect and formal. That was not at all like her daughter. Robinson called Carolyn on the phone and said that Suzette had, quote, decided not to take the job after all, end quote, and had run off with a man named Jim Turner. He also mentioned that her daughter stole some of Robinson's money. A couple weeks later, even more letters arrived, but now they were postmarked from San Jose, California. These ones were typed, but still had Suzette's cursive signature down at the bottom. She wrote about sailing off on a yacht, having a great time, but the tone and format once again didn't sound like Suzette to those who knew her. Carolyn was positive that these letters were fake and that this didn't come from her daughter. In late March, friends and family got emails from Suzette saying that she was off the grid traveling and not to worry. Her Aunt Marcia noted that these emails also didn't sound like Susie, and what they didn't know was that Robinson had taken control of Suzette's email as well. The letters coming from California were thanks to an old friend of Robinson's named Gene Glines. He mailed her envelopes and asked her to drop them in a California mailbox as a favor, which she did on March 27th. She didn't know what they were, but she agreed to do this only if Robinson would stop contacting her. I find it interesting that someone that he thought was a friend wanted nothing to do with him, but yet she still did him this favor. I can't help but wonder if maybe she was afraid of him, but let me know what you think about that. In May of 2000, Suzette's family received letters from Veracruz, Mexico. These were also typed with language that didn't match Suzette's typical speaking style. To pull this off, John had a maintenance man's mother named Lydia Ponce, who was visiting from Mexico, help him. He gave the associate the letters and asked that his mom mail them from a resort in Mexico once she returned, which she did in mid-May. Ponce even wrote a return address on them to make them seem legit. Meanwhile, Robinson had prepared dozens of fake letters that he hadn't sent yet, and these were found later on. Investigators discovered 42 envelopes pre-addressed to Suzette's family and 31 sheets of stationery saying "Love you, Suzette" signed at the bottom, all ready to be mailed out. He'd even made cards for upcoming birthdays for relatives with envelopes addressed and stamped. Carolyn and the family didn't fall for it, though. They reported Suzette missing to the authorities by the spring of 2000, and this made John Robinson look highly suspicious. This finally put him on law enforcement's radar in a very serious way. By April of 2000, the FBI and local police were quietly beginning to look into John Robinson in connection with multiple missing women. This pattern was far too obvious now to ignore because Paula, Lisa, Katherine, Beverly, both of the face, Isabella, and now Suzette all had ties to him, and time was ticking. Suzette Troughton's death was the last murder Robinson is known to have committed. Law enforcement in Kansas and Missouri started comparing notes because here was a man that was last seen with 5 women who had all vanished. Authorities formed a joint Kansas-Missouri task force and began surveillance on him. Because they hadn't found any of the victims' remains, they needed concrete evidence in order to step in. They dug through the trash at Robinson's home dozens of times. Detective Bussell from Lenexa PD collected his garbage, finding clues like notes, phone bills, names of women, and more, but nothing incriminating. They even got a wiretap on Robinson's phone lines. However, he was extremely guarded and careful when he was on the phone. Investigators looked into Robinson's multiple properties, including his Olathe trailer home, his farm in Linn County, and the storage units that he had in Missouri that he rented under fake names. This all raised the hairs on the back of the investigators' necks. They knew something was gravely wrong here. The authorities got cooperation from 2 women who had recently survived encounters with John. These women provided the police the probable cause that they needed to finally arrest him on lesser charges and get those search warrants for his properties. This led to Johnson County prosecutors filing charges on June 2, 2000 for battery and felony theft against John Robinson. As soon as that arrest warrant was in hand, police moved in. John was tricked into coming into the Kansas City Police Department, and as soon as he arrived, he was arrested. Teams of officers rushed to search all of John's properties, And at Robinson's mobile home and utility shed, investigators uncovered a treasure trove of evidence. They found documents and IDs of some of the missing women. They found Lisa Stacy's personal paperwork and receipts, which is incredibly incriminating since Lisa was never seen after being with Robinson. The police also found items belonging to Isabella Lewica, like her computer, and Suzette Troughton's items like collectibles and keepsakes that her mother later identified as Suzette's. They also found IRS forms and check copies for Sheila and Debbie Faith. And last but not least, this is where the infamous stash of pre written letters and envelopes were found. Floppy disks and computers that contained all the emails and chats between all the women were found, including the ongoing communications with the victims' families. At the property, police seized Robinson's guns and collection of hammers, mallets, and other striking tools from his property to look into. 9 hammers, 2 axes or picks, and a chisel were taken from his workshop and garage. None of them had visible blood on them, but at trial, an expert demonstrated how easily they could be cleaned and added that the victims' injuries were all consistent, which we will talk about here more in a minute. The crime lab found blood traces in the Olathe house, specifically in his bedroom and on some towels. Even more striking evidence came from his Lynn County trailer, though. At Robinson's rural farm, the search began on June 3rd and lasted an entire week. Remember, he lived with his wife in the first trailer, not this one. This is the one in the remote location. Early in this search, at around 1 p.m. on June 3rd, a Johnson County detective named Harold Hughes made a horrifying discovery. Using cadaver dogs, they found 2 55-gallon metal barrels on the property sitting out in the open by a shed. The dogs alerted and Hughes opened them, and inside each of them was a human corpse in an advanced state of decomposition. The crime scene was secured and those barrels were removed for autopsy. Back inside of the farm's trailer, forensic teams found even more evidence. Reddish-brown stains were found on the walls and baseboards and trims, and these all tested positive for Suzette Troughton's blood. This confirmed that at least some part of her murder happened inside that trailer. A blood-stained paper towel in the sink also matched Suzette's DNA. A roll of duct tape in the bedroom trash can had Isabella's blood on it, and it was the same kind of duct tape that they would later find in her barrel. This strongly linked Isabella's murder to the trailer as well. Hairs matching Suzette's were found on various bloody items, and this meant that she absolutely was physically present and bleeding in that environment. On June 5th, acting on what they'd learned, investigators went to the Store More storage facility in Raymore, Missouri. Robinson had been renting units there since 1993 under the name of Beverly Bonner. They cut the lock on the E2 unit and they were immediately hit with the foul odor of death. Inside, they found 3 large drums in between all clutter, wrapped in plastic, with cat litter around them to soak up fluids. The scene was shocking. They opened one black barrel and saw a human body curled up inside. They stopped there. The other 2 barrels that were still sealed were strongly suspected to contain remains as well, and these were immediately turned over to the Jackson County Medical Examiner. By June 6th to 7th, autopsies confirmed the identities of the barrel victims. The 2 found in Kansas were Suzette Troughton and Isabella Lewica, and the 3 in Missouri were Beverly Bonner, Sheila Faith, and Debbie Faith. All had died by 1 or more blunt force injuries to the head consistent with a hammer. We're going to go into this a little bit deeper on each individual victim, but this was the forensic jackpot needed to tie Robinson inarguably to all of the murders. Law enforcement had stumbled upon 5 bodies and a mountain of evidence. Although Lisa Stacy's body was missing, evidence of her murder was clear from all the adoption paperwork and testimony. Paula Godfrey and Katherine Clampet also remained missing, but witnesses and patterns connected Robinson to them as well. The investigation became one of the biggest serial killer cases in Kansas and Missouri state history. On June 6, 2000, the story was breaking and John Robinson's double life was all over the news. The detectives continued digging and they interviewed Robinson's family and acquaintances. Robinson's wife, Nancy, admitted that back in January of 1985, John had mysteriously brought home a baby girl claiming it was an adoption, and this was Tiffany, Lisa Stacy's baby. That helped build the Lisa Stacy case. Additional family described how through the 90s, he usually had women staying at his property and introduced them as his employees, but then they would vanish. All of this formed a terrifying picture. John Robinson, family man and entrepreneur, was in fact a serial killer. The autopsies of Robinson's known victims told a consistent and horrific story. Each victim died from blunt force trauma, and now we're going to get into more of the specific heartbreaking details. 28-year-old Suzette Troughton was found in a metal drum at the Kansas property. She had an oval skull defect on the left side of her head, which reflected a crushing blow. The edges of the wound suggested that a round-faced, heavy object caused it. Internally, there was extensive hemorrhaging and brain fragmentation. A rope or ligature was found around her head, covering her mouth and nose, and she had no defensive wounds. This means that she was completely caught off guard. The coroner found a post-mortem skin tear near her left armpit, and this was likely from handling her or stuffing her body in the drum after she had died. Isabella Luica was 21, and she was also found in a drum in Kansas. We touched on this a little earlier, but her skull had 2 major lacerations and fractures, and each of them would have been fatal. The similarity to Suzette's injuries was mentioned by the pathologist, and she also didn't have any signs of defensive wounds. She was still in her nightgown, so they had theorized that she was attacked in her sleep, which would also explain the lack of defensive wounds. 49-year-old Beverly Bonner was discovered in a drum in Missouri. She was extremely decomposed at around 6 years post-mortem, but her skeletal injuries showed multiple skull fractures from repeated blows with a rounded, heavy instrument. The ME, Dr. Young, described substantial trauma to the head and said that the pattern was consistent with a hammer. She had been fully clothed for cold weather, which might mean that the murder happened in the winter of 1994. Each blow that she suffered could have been fatal. Defensive injuries could not be determined due to the state of composition, though. 45-year-old Sheila Faith was found in a drum in Missouri as well. Her skull showed multiple impact sites and had been likely gone for 5 or 6 years. Her right ulna, or forearm bone, was fractured mid-shaft, and this is a classic defensive move when someone goes to raise their arm to protect their head and the forearm takes the hit. This means that she saw John coming towards her, and that image is heart-wrenching because she died fighting and with the fear of what would happen to her disabled daughter. 15-year-old Debbie Faith was found in the same place as her mom. Her bones growth plates were open still, verifying that she was a teenage girl. Debbie was still wearing a diaper, and she had at least 3 separate skull impacts with a blunt object. It makes me physically sick to my stomach that given her disability, she couldn't even run or fight or even try to defend herself. She was so vulnerable in her wheelchair, and I just don't even have words for how sick this is. The pattern of these repeated blows to the heads of all the victims was unbelievably brutal. In all of the cases, death would have resulted from a massive brain injury. These injuries include severe intracranial bleeding from the skull fractures, direct lacerations to the brain tissue, swelling, and then loss of vital functions. Unconsciousness after that type of blow is likely in many of these murders, meaning that the victims hopefully didn't continue to feel this and suffer. The forensic timeline mattered in this investigation because the decomposition stages of each victim helped prosecutors establish the pattern of his killings. After John Edwards' arrest, Kansas charged him with the murders of Suzette, Isabella, and Lisa Stacy, along with kidnapping, theft, and interference with custody. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA traces, barrels tied directly to Robinson, and witness accounts all showed a pattern of luring vulnerable women under false pretenses. His 2002 Kansas trial became the longest in the state's history, and jurors heard about the gut-wrenching testimonies from the victims' families and saw horrifying physical evidence, including the barrels and bodies. Robinson's defense had no argument in this case. In October 2002, he was convicted on all counts, including the capital murders of Troughton and Luica, first-degree murder for Stacy, aggravated kidnapping, theft, and interference with parental custody for Tiffany. He was sentenced to death for the 2 capital murders, plus life and additional prison terms for the rest. In 2015, the Kansas Supreme Court upheld 1 death sentence, but overturned a few counts on some technicalities, still leaving him on death row where he currently remains today. Missouri then followed with its own charges for 5 more murders, including Paula Godfrey, Katherine Clampet, Beverly Bonner, and Sheila and Debbie Faith. Facing the likelihood of another death sentence, Robinson struck a deal in 2003. He pled guilty to those 5 killings in exchange for life without parole. He refused to reveal where the missing victims' remains were, denying closure to their families, which at that point, I don't understand. I suppose this was his attempt at him trying to control the situation, but who knows. Altogether, Robinson was convicted of 8 murders, 3 in Kansas and 5 in Missouri. He will never see the light of day again outside of those prison walls. Now in his 80s, Robinson sits on Kansas's death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility. He has still never disclosed what he did to Paula Godfrey, Lisa Stacy, or Katherine Clampet, but investigators believe that their bodies possibly may have been discarded in barrels or they were hidden somewhere. In the years after, his wife divorced him, civil lawsuits have been filed, and Lisa Stacy's daughter Heather, aka baby Tiffany, successfully sued the hospital and Robinson to prevent him from profiting off these crimes. She has spoken publicly about her mother's case, and I couldn't imagine how difficult this was for her to navigate, being raised in the Robinson family. She literally called this man Uncle John. John Edward Robinson is one of the most evil serial killers I think I've ever heard of. He exploited trust and vulnerability at every opportunity, promising jobs to those in need, adoption to his own brother, care to a disabled child, and love to a lonely heart, only to betray and destroy everyone in his path. Robinson's case shows us that evil can wear a friendly face and that sometimes predators can only be caught once all the puzzle pieces fall together. Amber, thank you so much for recommending today's case, or I should say multiple cases because there were quite a few of them. You've been here for a long time, so I'm very, very grateful that you've been here for so long and stuck it out with me. This was a very heavy video, and I just cannot wrap my mind around this level of evil. Everyone, please be sure to prioritize your mental health this week and be kind to yourself. Nurse's orders. Don't forget to drop our blue butterfly secret handshake in the chat, and I'll see you next weekend. Bye.